Troubletcat here, recording for the Zombie Arcade, and today I'm reviewing Diablo 3.
And at the end of days, the first sign shall appear in the heavens. Justice shall fall upon the world of men. The armies of light and shadow will clash across the fields of eternity.
Now, I've never been an enormous fan of the Diablo series. The gameplay didn't really appeal to me. That said, I did play Diablo 1 and 2 a bit, and I could see what there was to like about the franchise. It had this cool, dark, gothic storyline and atmosphere, and gameplay that, while very simplistic, was also very refined, even if it didn't personally appeal to me greatly. Since I didn't spend huge amounts of time with the first two games, I'm not going to focus a lot on comparing Diablo 3 to those two games. I don't think it'd be fair to do that, and aside from that, I think it's generally better to try and review games on their own merits anyway, aside from whatever happened to come before in the franchise and what have you. In some ways, this makes Diablo 3 a hard game to review because without the context of the rest of the series, it's actually kind of hard to place into a genre. You might say it's obviously an RPG, and to an extent that's true, but a genre gives us, from a critical perspective, a list of standards to evaluate the game against, right? And it's unfair to criticize a game for not being good at something that it wasn't trying to do in the first place. That might seem like an odd point to bring up, but I'll come back to that later, and I assure you it'll make more sense by the end of this review. The storyline in the game is extremely predictable. Lots of plot twists, yes, but I was able to predict them even without intimate knowledge of the setting or the story of the other games, just based on what Diablo 3 itself tells you, and my friends playing the game guessed them even more easily. And on top of that, the script is pretty bland. It gets the job done in terms of keeping the story moving, but not really anything particularly interesting. Additionally, there are no real strong characters in Diablo 3. Although many of the characters in the game have plenty of additional dialogue exploring their backstories and their personalities and so on, most of the characters are extremely archetypal and as a result, not terribly interesting. The voice acting as well feels distinctly uninspired. Performances range from adequate to, frankly, terrible, and are more often than not a little below par. It makes the game's dark storyline feel a little farcical, and this, combined with the predictable storyline and the lack of character investment, plus a mediocre script on top of all of that, mean that the times when the game tries to have an emotional or dramatic moment fall completely flat. Although there are bits of information scattered here and there, the limited scope of the areas we're allowed to explore and the lack of meaningful side quests — there's pretty much just the main storyline and the occasional event, 5-minute or less side quests discovered while wandering around the game — makes it hard to get too interested in the setting or world. There's too much, or what there is here is handled too poorly, to invoke a real sense of mystery and intrigue surrounding the setting like Dark Souls did, for example. And there's nowhere near enough for the world to feel like a really truly explored fantasy setting, as we see in Bethesda's Elder Scrolls games. Clearly the story is not meant to be the focus here, which is a shame in some ways, because I've always felt like it's been one of Blizzard's strongest aspects over the years, with the storylines in Warcraft 3 and StarCraft 2 carrying single-player campaigns, which are often bland in RTSs, and making them much more memorable experiences with some interesting characters and an actual emotional investment, but that's not really the case in Diablo 3, and I have to say, if you're looking for a strong story from your RPG, you're going to want to look elsewhere. It'd be a crime not to mention the pre-rendered cutscenes that bookend the game's 4 acts. As always, these are absolutely gorgeous. Blizzard have always said in a league of their own in this department, and Diablo 3 is no exception. I still think it'd be cool to see a CGI feature film from Blizzard someday, as they clearly have the technical ability to pull it off. Aside from that, the game feels very polished from a technical point of view, as Blizzard titles often do. The feel of the game is silky smooth, and the graphics, while not the most technically impressive I've ever seen, or even close to it, are more than adequate. I particularly love the way the game uses color, lighting, and environmental effects to give a game that is much more interesting visually than a lot of stuff on the market today. The game really does pop visually, and there are a lot of great touches. Grass moving around your character, parts of the levels getting hit and destroyed, and the way enemies explode and fly across the screen that make the world very reactive to your character's presence. Combat effects for audio are appropriately badass, and the game's music fits like a glove and is pretty cool in its own right. There are some interesting and cool monster designs and environments, despite being randomly generated for the most part, still manage to have a real sense of atmosphere about them. Overall, the presentation is fantastic. But, and this is a big but, I can't help but feel that Blizzard have done themselves a bit of a disservice with the particular style of visuals they've chosen. The somewhat cartoony textures, similar in style to what we've seen in Warcraft 3 and World of Warcraft, fail to complement the overall grim storyline and setting. It's refreshing to see so much color in a game, but there's no reason that Blizzard couldn't have gone with a darker, more realistic style while still maintaining the same kind of vibrancy. Perhaps this is just a pet peeve of mine, as I am personally not a fan of the style of graphics we see in WoW and now again in Diablo 3, and I can't deny that from an objective standpoint the presentation is close to flawlessly executed. I simply feel that the cartoony style is a little out of place here, and that the game would have had a bit more of an individual identity if it had distanced itself more from WoW graphics-wise. There are some other odd aspects, technically, that don't sit right. No character customization whatsoever, just feels a little lazy in a modern RPG. I mean, I understand wanting to have a distinct look for each class, but you can at least let me change my character's hair or something so that my barbarian isn't a complete carbon copy of my friend's barbarian, of every barbarian. And the completely fixed camera, while clearly a conscious design decision and rarely actually a problem, feels a little weird in a modern 3D RPG. You could argue that Diablo's always had a fixed camera, but this used to be a technical limitation thanks to the mostly 2D engine, a technical limitation which no longer exists. I mean, the camera angle that we get works fine for the most part, it just feels weird to me not to be able to move it. Like the presentation, the gameplay overall feels very, very refined, but again, has some aspects to it that don't quite sit right with me. In some ways, the main gameplay represents a real stroke of brilliance in its elegant simplicity. Regardless of which character type you pick, you're going to have 6 abilities available to you at any point in time. Mouse left, mouse right, and number keys 1 through 4, with 3 or 4 choices for each slot in terms of which specific ability you want to use. Each of these abilities, 25 or so per class, additionally has a number of runes associated with it that slightly alter the ability's effects. One rune might give an ability more damage, while another might give it a small chance to stun, for example. You also have 3 slots for passive bonuses that affect your character. You can change any of your ability slots or the runes associated with your abilities at any time. After your initial class selection, you aren't locked into anything permanently regarding your character. This is, as I said, a real stroke of brilliance. The wide variety of options means that each character can be played in a number of different styles depending on your personal preference, and the ability to swap out abilities and runes at any time allows you to constantly fine-tune your build or completely change it if you're so inclined. The fact that they're always split into these basic categories means that despite a huge number of options, actual gameplay always flows easily, and the choices you have to make about which abilities you're going to use at a given time are genuinely interesting. It's a fantastic system that is accessible but also has a great deal of depth. It's a shame, then, that I honestly find most of the combat in the game a little dull. The fast-paced, single-character gameplay means that the game lacks the strategic depth of hardcore RPGs like Dragon's Age, Baldur's Gate, or the first couple of Fallout games, and there's not quite enough in terms of mechanical skill required to make the game shine as an action RPG. Although you have 6 abilities and there is some strategy to their selection and use, the game really does still just boil down to hammering on the attack keys until everything around you is dead. with your character's level and gear, as well as your ability loadout, although it's hard to get that too wrong, being much more the deciding factor in combat than anything you actually do during a fight. With the way the game is designed, it'd be hard to add too much strategy to actual combat, but if the game had, I don't know, manual blocking and dodging instead of hidden dice rolls, making it more a true action RPG, combat could have been a truly hectic, really skill-based affair. Instead, while it's undeniably highly refined and the choices around the combat are interesting, the combat system itself feels very flat to me, and more often than not, I found it honestly a little boring. I will say, though, that it's not completely painful to use or anything. It's certainly not bad. It's just not very involved. This is a good game to play if you just want to switch off your brain and kill some shit, and the huge number of enemies you fight at times also makes the combat visually interesting and seems suitably epic. The overall bland combat, though, is compounded by the fact that the game is, for the most part, pretty damn easy. For the most part. It also features strange difficulty spikes. Sometimes these come in the form of boss battles, but other times you'll encounter groups of enemies in the wild that are incredibly difficult to defeat at random. But overall, I found the experience easy to the point of triviality, to the point of boredom, and while playing with a friend or two made the overall experience a little more fun, playing with a friend or two makes almost any game bearable. And I still maintain it's even better to get those friends playing a game that was fun in its own right. The game clocks in at 10 to 15 hours long on a first playthrough, depending on how much you feel like exploring every nook and cranny of the environment. It seems a little short for an RPG to me, and indeed the entire game felt kind of rushed along, with the ending in particular being very abrupt. At the same time, a lot of the quests during the middle of the game kind of felt like padding to me. There's very little meat on the bones here, is the point, and although I'm fairly certain that Blizzard intended people to play through the game multiple times, it's the same thing on each playthrough. So the complaint remains that there's very little content here, honestly. There are some other things you should take into account when considering whether or not you want to buy this game. Multiplayer, I mentioned briefly above. It's essentially co-op. You can invite another player in to help out in your quest, or you can join another player's game to help them out. You can make your game public. You can make it so only friends can join. There's a few options here. This does make the game more enjoyable if playing with a friend, but I don't really see the appeal in playing with random people on the internet. To each their own, I guess, on that count. PvP is scheduled for release at a later date, but it's not out now, so I don't have any comment on that at this point. There's also an auction house, which is accessible from the game's menu, and the inclusion of this MMO feature is actually a pretty cool concept, allowing you to trade with everyone else playing the game. Somewhat more dubious is the Real Money auction house, which is going to be coming out in the coming weeks. I can't put my finger on why exactly, but the idea that players will be able to sell in-game items and gold for real money through the game itself makes me uneasy. Isn't this a practice that MMOs and developers in general have been trying to stop for a long time now? We'll see how things develop when that gets enabled again at a later date, but, well, it makes me a little uncomfortable. Finally, the fact that you need to be connected to Battle.net at all times, even to play the game single player, that should frankly be completely unacceptable. Connection to a central server for multiplayer? Fine. And it's needed for features like the auction house. But, well, there's a big stink around launch when people were not able to get in and play thanks to server load, and that's been resolved, but, for example, the other night I was playing the game when Blizzard decided to do 8-hour maintenance. 8 hours where I can't play the game I paid for, the single-player game, because there's server maintenance. It's fucking bullshit. You can say, damn TTC, just go outside or something, but no, that's bullcrap. This is a product that I paid for, a single-player game, and I should be able to play it when I want to. This is the worst kind of DRM there is. I mean, what happens if Blizzard decides to take down the servers in a few years, maybe to force people to buy the next installment to keep playing? You won't be able to play the game anymore at all, not even single-player. This is not a practice that should be acceptable from a game developer, and to be honest, I kind of feel bad for supporting it by buying the game. In conclusion, there's no denying that Diablo 3 is a highly polished, very refined experience, and some aspects of its design are truly great. At the end of the day, though, there's this slew of small problems, some choices that just feel a little dodgy business practices, and a game that feels somewhat empty of much actual fun. I mentioned at the start of the review that it's unfair to criticize a game for not being something it wasn't trying to be in the first place, and I'm worried I might be doing that with Diablo 3. If Diablo 3 was trying to be a true, solid, hardcore RPG, things like the lack of character customization, the subpar storytelling, the lack of side quests or motivation to explore, and the minimal strategy involved in actual combat are glaring issues, but maybe that's not what Diablo 3 wanted to be. Similarly, if Diablo 3 wanted to be a solid action RPG, the simplistic, repetitive combat is a massive flaw. But again, maybe that's not what it's trying to be either. I find the game kind of boring, but maybe I'm not the kind of gamer Diablo 3 is targeted at. What is the game supposed to be then? What is the point? Well, as far as I can tell, the point of the game is collecting loot. I'm not trying to put down the game by saying that, but that seems to be the entire focus. Collect shiny virtual items. Trade for other shiny virtual items. Make your character stronger with the shiny virtual items. Whatever. I'm the kind of gamer that thinks that grinding is the antithesis of good gameplay. And that games should be rewarding and fun not because of, the virtual rewards you get, but because they involve the satisfaction of overcoming challenges, and a good, solid storyline doesn't hurt either. Diablo 3 is not a game like that. It doesn't provide either of those things, and so from my perspective, it's not really that worthwhile of a title, despite not being awful, being fun at times, and having some genuinely interesting aspects to it. It's not absolutely awful or completely vacant, and I'll probably get at least a bit more playtime out of it, but it definitely won't go into my favorites list, even if it is a fun game to bash away at when I just want to turn my mind off. If you're the kind of gamer who likes a grind, who gets a lot of satisfaction from finding new items eternally, even if the gameplay itself isn't that amazing, or if you want a title where you can just switch off your brain and blow stuff up with a thing in a virtual environment, you'll love Diablo 3. It's a good game from that perspective. It does those things very well, and there's nothing wrong with liking that style of game, but if you're like me and you're looking for a good story or for a more complete, in-depth gameplay experience that's satisfying in its own right, you probably want to look elsewhere. So that's my review of Diablo 3. I'm not going to give it a score because I don't think they tell you anything useful. And thanks for watching, guys. Until next time, Troubletcat out.